Some of them were like, I was like holding on.
Ding, 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 ding. Very nice atmosphere here today. Hard to interrupt the conversations. So welcome again to our Lassie's lunchtime series talks. And before I introduce our speaker today, we also have some announcements. Alberto wanted to announce it.
Yeah, well, welcome everybody. Just three very quick things. First, to thank our here that are in charge of putting all of this together, the food and that. So,
Thank you.
The second one, those of you who are taking the class for credit, I open a space in the Canvas for you to upload your reflection papers and that, so you can start doing that. And last, there's a talk this afternoon in the law school at 6:30. The title of the talk is Protest and Politics in Latin America, so it sort of goes along with what we're going to hear now. It's by Ryan Berg. It's a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, so it's in the law school, room 5240, the law school, so they said free pizza and wings too. All right, well, I'll let Kata introduce her speaker.
It looks like if you are interested in the conflicts and protests, you can have food for the whole day for free today. I have a great honor to introduce our Tinker professor, Jorge Tovar, who is an associate professor of La Universidad de los Andes in the Department of Economy and has very broad interests covering international trade, industrial organizations, sport economics, development economics, economic history, applied economics, and most fascinating for me from his CV were talks about soccer and sport in general. So I picked up some titles such as Performance, Diversity, and National Identity, Evidence from the Association of Football, and another one, Gasping for Air, Soccer Players' Passive Behavior at High Altitude. But he also wrote about history of slavery in Colombia. He actually has a book co-written about that subject. And today he will talk to us about peace, war, and protests in Colombia. So we were in Colombia, we went back to Ecuador, and now we are again in Colombia. Please welcome our Tinker professor, Jorge Tovar.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here at Lassie's. I'm very happy to be at Madison University this semester. And there are two things going on in Latin America these days. One, there are protests everywhere. And the other thing is there are a bunch of academics talking about them and trying to explain what's going on. So I was talking to Alberto, that's why there's some other talk in the afternoon, and then you probably will hear a bunch of views from a bunch of people, because we really don't understand very well what's going on. So I have a point of view. It's more a hypothesis that I would like to share with you today. And the strongest protest took place last year in Chile. They're very complex, and I am not going to try to explain them. Probably the guy in the afternoon is going to try to do that. But following that, other countries kind of try to, or are very closely following them, among them Colombia. So I would say that massive protests in Colombia began the last quarter last year. And what you see in this advertising for this protest was essentially what I see the problem, and the problem for everyone, for the government, and the problem for those who were actually going to protest. Why? They were, against the government. They were saying, we don't want a labor reform, we don't want a pension reform, we don't want privatization. At the time, there were no labor reform, there were no privatizations strong going on, and there were no pension reforms. Then this, important, we want to follow on the accords that the students managed to negotiate in 2018. That is an important issue. And and then that's the other point I wanted, for the right of protest, the right to go and shout in the street. At some point, there are so many protests in the street that it's funny that the people are saying, we want the right to go on the street when you are going every day, right? So why are they happening? Well, Colombia is doing well. This is for 2018. Some major Latin American economies. We would be third last year, but if you look at the data this year, we actually are really good in terms of GDP growth. 3.3%, higher than, well, Chile took a big toll last year, higher than Peru. And, maybe we economists, I'm an economist, so we would say, well, we're doing really good. I don't understand what's going on. But you probably all know that today, not only economists, everyone wants to look at other leading indicators. So, yeah, we're doing great in terms of economic growth, but if you want to look at inequality measured by the Gini index, this is taken from the World Bank to compare easily, well, Colombia is not doing that great. Brazil is always more unequal than us, but Colombia is famous for its inequality. But even in that sense, we are improving. Colombia, the Gini index, inequality is being reduced, not at the rate we would want, some ups and downs, but there is a clear trend that goes, that favors a bit of equality. So, my main point here is that, we have some issues economic-wise in Colombia. Of course, it is still a developing country. Economic is okay, but there are so many economic-wise issues that it would be good reasons to actually go and march against this for a better economy. But I want to argue that economics has something to do with it, but mostly it's just a matter of politics. So Santos, President Santos, he was president between 2010 and 2018. He won the Nobel Prize, if you recall, and he announced a peace agreement with the FARC guerrilla on August 2016. This was a very big deal because FARC was the biggest guerrilla, the remaining guerrilla in Latin America, and they've been fighting every government and the Colombian state for over 50 years. So in principle, this was really good news for all of us. We were ready for peace, or Colombia was ready for peace. That's how it was sold to the world, and that's why he got the Nobel Prize, and that's why when he called for a referendum, he was expecting to win, and that's why I got a bunch of friends from around the world calling me the next day saying, I don't understand why they didn't win the referendum. You're voting for peace. So the government sold the referendum that we have to ratify the agreement, as whether you want peace or war. And you have to understand a bit on the context, you have to understand that the president was completely sure, the government was completely sure that they were going to win. Polls were 60-40, they were, but 70-30, most of them, they were going to win. There was very little money for those who were saying vote no against this agreement. And still, a very small margin, but still, those that voted no against the peace agreement, they won 50.2 against 49.8. So this was a big, major upset for President Santos, and probably that's the beginning of all what we're living today in the past 20 months or so. Because he said, okay, we're going to talk with the leaders of the opposition, trying to understand what your problems is with this agreement. Of course, the guerrilla said, we're not going to change. We signed, we agreed an agreement. We're not going to change any essentials of the agreement. So in essence, the basic agreement was backed by Congress. The president had Congress with him. Was signed in November of that year. And that's what most of you that follow Latin American news saw in the newspapers worldwide, saying Colombia has peace now. And that's very beautiful as a headline, but many saw it very far from the truth. It turned out that in election year 2018, Santos couldn't be reelected anymore, but whoever his followers were, they lost. And this guy, who was essentially unknown just 4 years earlier, but he was backed by Álvaro Uribe, which is a major figure in politics in Colombia, won the election. And it's a right-wing party, and their most essential criticisms against the agreements are probably two. One, that they claim that in the agreement, drug trafficking was to be understood as a matter of politics, not as a matter of illegality. So FARC leaders could not be accused as drug lords, the Mexican cartel or the cartels in Colombia, but they were just dealing drugs, or trafficking drugs better, because they were part of the war and they needed some money to finance this war. So that was a major issue. The other major issue has to do with child abuse. So for years, guerrilla went to the guerrilla, well, everyone, and the paramilitaries also, but in this case we're talking about the guerrilla. The guerrilla went to towns, they took minors under 18 years old and took them to the guerrilla. And then once the agreement was signed, there was all these horror stories with boys and girls, how girls were forced to be the girlfriend of such or particular leaders in the guerrilla, how others were forced to do an abortion because they couldn't have a kid they were not allowed, essentially. And so this Duque's party, Uribe's party really, wanted for this to be punishable with jail. But in essence, the agreement says that if any of these leaders are going to be declared guilty, they will spend a maximum of 8 years in doing some community services. Essentially, there will be no jail, and that's a major issue. So what happened? Did the agreement make, well, that's still an open question, but I would say yes, actually, right? Remember, this is coca cultivated area. The Santos government, the administration, started to negotiate in 2012 with FARC, and FARC was a major drug cartel, where essentially they had all these type of connections. Uribe was president between 2002 and 2010. His legacy was to fight the guerrilla, kill the guerrillas if he could, and that brought down one of the major sources of revenue for the guerrilla, which is illegality. I'm drawing here coca, but think also of illegal mining, think of also of illegal logging, right? All these illegal activities that you can do in the countryside, the guerrilla had a say on this. And when with the government pressing and doing all this war, especially up to 2010, all this illegality was going down. But if you see here, when negotiations began, coca cultivated area grew significantly. And the reason is very simple, and the reason is what many people said, I mean, it wasn't very difficult to foresee, is that, well, when the guerrilla backed and abandoned these areas, it was the time for the state to go and send schools, hospitals, the military, of course, have presence. But essentially, the Colombian state, where you want to say it was Santos, which was until here, or Duque, or whoever, the Colombian state was unable to fill that empty space. So, new groups started to say, these guys are gone, but there's money here. You know, everyone is shooting heroin in the first world, right? And they're doing cocaine, and we still need to sell illegal gold, and they need the wood and all this stuff, right? So what's going on is that in Colombia, all these areas where the guerrilla left, because they did leave, they're concentrated in some camps, was taken by illegality. And there is a huge discussion what this illegality is, and it's beyond what I want to talk today, okay? But so, yes, I mean, the agreement did mean a bit of peace, in the sense that there was a time, you know, a couple of years, where actually there were very little, if any, killings, violent killings in certain areas, which were very used to many deaths, okay? But then it all started to rise again. And so when Duque won the elections, the opposition, they were worried because they believed in the agreement. There is an important and significant part of the population that believe that the agreement should be enforced as is. The government wants to twist it a bit. So we have this clash. And so essentially the opposition said we're going to do protests every week if we can. So they had a small protests every week, teachers or workers, people from the countryside, everyone who could was walking, protesting for something, but something was going on also. And it's this. And this is also, I believe, key. And this is UN data. In 2019, 107 human rights defenders were killed, mostly in far away of the big cities. And in the first 2 weeks of 2020, they were killing more than essentially a person per day. One of these people that they are human rights defenders. Most of them have some political views. Others who just are community leaders. But if a community leader says, we don't want to have coca here because our traditional crop is whatever, they are being killed. And this, we've been killing ourselves for 50 years in Colombia. But this, for the first time, I would say, in recent years, really made it to the cities. People were very aware that these killings were going on. And it's not that, it's not that the government is killing them, but it turns out that during the second term of Uribe, there was this illegal actions by the military, where they took some poor people from small towns in Colombia, or from towns in Colombia, and killed them, and then said they were guerrillas, right? This is what they call the fake positives, okay? So there is the sensation, especially among the opposition, that, okay, maybe it's not Duque going to ordering to kill these guys, right? But I don't trust the military. They're not doing enough to stop this. At least they're not doing enough. So the clash is going on. And the president is not very charismatic. He's really unpopular. I mean, he won. democracy. He got more votes. Colombia, yeah, whoever gets more votes wins. But he was very unpopular very fast. Because the problem is that when he was elected, there was two choices. It was Duque, or it was this other guy who's seen as very socialist, very Venezuela-oriented Chavez guy. And so many people essentially voted, what's worse? Venezuela or this guy, right wing, I don't like him. So many people didn't really have a clear option. They just voted against the other guy, okay? So that's why Duque became very unpopular very fast. This is December ratings. I haven't seen any this year, but I'm pretty sure if anything they're going up, okay? Moreover, he never had strong control of the Congress because he came out with this. He's kind of a young guy. He's younger than me. As I said, kind of unknown in politics. So he had this idea that I'm going to deal with Congress differently. I'm not going to give you bureaucracy. You have to support me because of my ideas, right? And so he's not very appreciated in Congress. Among citizens, well, this is, mining his credibility. And even his party. Why? Because he won with his party. His party is right-wing, and some of these guys are saying, well, why is this guy a minister? He is not part of us. He not only is not part of us, he's completely against what we think. But he's trying to open himself, so he doesn't have the control of essentially anything that you need to govern properly a country. So he's very weak. And in this scenario, opposition saying we will protest, we will make a mess of this country because we just don't like you. In 2018, the last quarter of 2018, there were massive protests, but only by students of public universities because they were essentially seeking more money for the university, for education and stuff. Okay, and they managed to get this money, sign an interesting accord. Agreement, but a year later, everyone, the perfect storm kind of came. So teachers, school teachers essentially in Colombia is a very strong union. It's politically oriented to the left, okay, and they joined with workers, the traditional unions. Worker unions, and students supported them to call for a march or walk or protest against what they call the paquetazo, which is essentially the first slide I showed you, right? Which they would say, well, we don't want labor reform, we don't want pension reform, we don't want privatization. Okay. In fact, they were complaining against a pension reform, which was a suggestion from a think tank owned by the banks. So it had nothing to do with the government, but they were protesting against that. The students wanted to keep the what they had signed in 2018, which actually the government, some objective measures say the government is kind of fulfilling their promises, but they said, we want more money and we want you to follow on the accords. Teachers seek better health and pension regimes, and this is important. Essentially, everyone doesn't like Duque, and everyone doesn't like that these guys are being killed. No one knows them in reality, but the public impression of these people is that they're good people. They're just workers working for the community, and they're getting killed. So it was massive. It was a success for those who called for the protest. Depending on figures, it wasn't in the millions, but figures vary. From 200,000 to 600,000 or 700,000 people that went on the street to protest. That was a Thursday. It went on to Friday, and so at some point, some in the position were really feeling that this would go on like Chile. And that's why Chile is, our mirror in that sense. It would go on, and we would be, and well, they said, we are going to be able to keep this pressure and this process until the government falls. But then in Colombia, we are a strange country. We have this democracy has gone forever, right? With one small exception, at least 20th century in the 50s, very small exception. We didn't have all this military regime. So at some point, some people said, well, why are we going to throw this president, which we don't like? He was democratically elected. And there's another thing, it's November. And, well, you are all aware of Latin America, and December is Christmas. And in Christmas, we don't work, nor protest. We have fun. And so they did keep the pressure during November, but as soon as December came, people started to relax. It's December, the villancicos and the food, the Christmas food and all this stuff. And so, actually, yeah, it diluted the process, okay, in December. Then, and important, Colombia is a country, is a country with cities have traditionally remained far away from violence, at least from the typical violence of the guerrillas. So yeah, we in the city we were never really much aware that all these killings, you see it on the news. Oh, poor people. Yeah, but life goes on. But at some point, what they were taking is all this kind of vandalism. So following on Chile, they were in this November march. They actually did a lot of damage, especially in Bogota, which is the capital, and so the media is there, and Cali, which is a major city. So everyone went and walked, but there is one specificity of this protest, and is that there is no unified leadership. So the students are there, they have some leaders, the teachers are there, they have their leaders, the union leaders, the traditional union, the other unions are there, right? So they're not really one leader you can talk to, but they managed to write a list of 13 proposals. The president was so knocked. The day of the protest, on Thursday, he didn't show up until 9 p.m. on Thursday. At some point, you didn't know if there was a president. The guy didn't show up until 9 p.m. when everything was burning and stuff, and who is there a president around? But he said, at that point, okay, I'm going to listen. And the guys sent 30 proposals. So some economic proposals. Again, no labor reform, no pension reform, no corruption, no tax reform. And social issues, enforce the peace agreement, no more social leaders dead. So if you think about, particularly in terms of the economic proposals, well, they like the status quo. What is the government? No tax reform. It's an unequal country. We have to do something, right? No pension reform. No labor reform. So do you like what we have right now, right? And I think maybe for the first time, these leaders of these protests felt so empowered, so strong, so supported by media. Whatever they said would go on the media everywhere, on social networks, which is very important nowadays. They were very strong. They felt so strong that they essentially, at some point, they believe, and this is just my opinion, they really thought they were being elected to represent a bunch of people. So they wrote 104 bullet points. You can read them if you want. I tried to, something. But everything. They want to write a new constitution. Some things, I don't know, they want to end the gender wage gap. That's a point, yeah. That's an issue, right? But, I don't know if they were marching for that. They want third mortgage interest rates, but with a gender bias, which I've never heard of. There's a lot of policy issues. I work actually on this, gender issues and stuff. But interest rates.